Again, the director of the film, Giulia Loktev, and Ksenia.
Thank you again for, first of all, thanks, Giulia, for inviting us here, and thank you to you for spending this, living through this with us, with all the characters.
Giulia, I think it would be good to start by for you telling us a little about the the origin of the film. Clearly, the film started as something and became something different. And so, what was your original concept, and what happened when you started filming? And
I mean, I can't say that I had a concept, but it happened so fast. So in the late summer of 21, Russia started declaring journalists foreign agents, and there was actually a New York Times article saying, Russian journalists being declared foreign agents and fighting back with humor. And you can see what attracted me to the story was, I saw there was a photo of Sonia and Ola in that Times article. There was a photo, I think, of Ksenia protesting. And I was like, wow, these women are living through this. I'm originally from Russia. I left when I was 9. But, Russian is the language I speak to my mom. And I kept up on news there, even though I'd never really lived in Russia. But I think, and I knew Anya socially. We weren't super close friends, but we were friends. And I contacted her, and she was working at RAIN, which had also been declared a foreign agent, and she had this amazing show, Who's Got the Power. And both Anya and I had this sense, I think that what we did so well is we had the sense that this is a warning sign. This isn't something small, that this is something disturbing when journalists are forced to label everything they write as coming from a foreign agent, to pay attention to the signs. And I remember at the time we talked about it like, what if you could film in 1935 in Germany when the first laws were passed, forcing people to mark themselves as others? And, it took a really long time. Things were going much slower then, and people were deciding, do we mark ourselves? Do we cooperate? Can I give in on this? And that's what we thought. We thought that was interesting enough. Like everyone had a sense something was happening to them. They just didn't know what. Like everyone felt it was going to be a crackdown aimed at them. Nobody was expecting that 4 months later Russia would invade Ukraine. And obviously there'd been a war in Ukraine. Russia had gone into Ukraine in 2014, but nobody was expecting the kind of war that we've been seeing. And so I think that's the best thing we really did, is paid attention to the warning signs.
And you shot the film entirely on your, you shot it yourself, and you did it on your iPhone. And was this just an aesthetic choice? I mean, was this an aesthetic choice also, or there were other reasons why you wanted to use something so small that allowed you also really intimate relationship with the subject?
Yeah, I didn't have a plan. I literally, Russia wasn't giving visas due to COVID. And I think I got one of the first visas after COVID. And I jumped on a plane the next day, and I thought maybe I'd have a cinematographer work with me, because I don't think of myself really, I've worked usually with cinematographers. And then it was so clear the first night that I was there, Anya was having this gathering of friends, and she said, well, we don't really know this guy, can you borrow his camera? And I borrowed his camera, and people were already there and talking about interesting things. And I was futzing around with his follow focus settings. And so I picked up my phone just then thinking, what's happening around me is interesting. And also her husband was a podcaster. He had a microphone. I was like, let me use that. And I started shooting, and it was in the first half hour. It became so clear. Wait, this is right. I have to be here alone with people that feel comfortable with me, and nobody's really paying attention to you when you're with a phone. And also it allows me to kind of respond to things visually. I think I have a pretty good instinctive eye. But it's just physically creates this intimacy that you wouldn't have with a bigger camera. I think you feel different when you have a large object pointed at you than when we're also used to phones.
Ksenia, what kind of conversation did you have with Giulia at the beginning, or how did you learn that she was making a film or making something?
I think Anya introduced us to each other, and then I remember our first Zoom call with Giulia, Anna, and some other protagonists. And I think Giulia was like, I have no idea what it is, how it will look like. And I think we all just jumped into it and we were like, okay, let's try. And especially because at that time, a lot of people reached out to Sonia and Dolia, how Julia said, and to me because of my partner who was arrested. And I think we were like, this is just one more project. It will probably, I don't know, never be released, or it will be released, but it will be like 1 hour or like, and
Five
then we
minutes.
ended up with 5 hours, even more than 5 hours, which I
Yeah, they
think
had no
is,
idea I was going to follow them for the
yeah,
next 4 years.
yeah. But what you mentioned, I think it's really important about the camera, because as journalists, we used to be together with a cameraman, especially me and Tanya, because we always worked with video. But of course, it's so strange for us to be a subject. And I mean, I'm a control freak, but I think the key was that everything was so fast, like something happened every second. So Julia just was there near, and it was always like me crying, and she's like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I have to film it, but I'm so sorry. So yeah, but I don't think that I ever felt uncomfortable, which I understand that how people can feel, because I filmed people a lot and sometimes they cry and they discuss very hard topics. But I think with Julius was very natural, and she just was there. And sometimes I see some parts of the movie and I'm like, was she there? I don't remember her being there.
And the funny thing is, because it was an iPhone, unlike, so many people when they shoot documentaries, they're shooting with a long lens that allows you to stand across the room. And like most of the time, I was about this far from the people I was filming, because you don't have, like, I had a little attachment lens on it, but I still had to be, because I like faces, I like close-ups. So in order to get a close-up, I had to be like this distance, but which I realized the other day, I was like, that's the natural distance you usually are when you're hanging out with people, with your friends. You're not in the corner somewhere far away. So the iPhone also had this kind of interesting thing where it forced people to get accustomed to my body being present. Like, and because I was alone, there was no, like, I would put microphones on everyone. There was no other crew people there. And so they just got used to me, like, just physically being like, hi. And sometimes it was very close. I think the thing that Ksusha mentions is really important, that there was this mutual trust, I think. Like, I understood that they knew as journalists what they were doing. And so, like, I went, it's not very easy to actually sit there, like when Ksusha's in the cab and I'm about this close, and she's crying. It's not like, I'm not a monster. That's not a comfortable thing to film. But at the same time, you're like Joan Didion, gold. But I knew that she would, I knew that if she wanted me to stop, she would tell me to stop. And you have that kind of trust, I still felt bad, but there was knowing that they know what they're doing was very important.
I think back to your question, at the very beginning, we discussed that we will have the right to say no, which is also for us as for journalists what we always do. And that it was like, okay, maybe not if you don't like how your hair look like, but if you think that this one is too sensitive or not secure, then
yeah, and it was a verbal agreement. It wasn't even like something we signed, but we said, I said that you will check all the footage for factual accuracy or risk to you or your loved ones, because it was really important that the risks were changing. Like, my sense of accountability to the community I was filming is incredibly important to me. First of all, they're all a community. So if I fuck up by one person, it's like I will have it's the entire community. But for me, it's also, their calculation of risk completely changed and the actual facts of the risks changed. So it wasn't important, like if you said it's okay when at the moment you were filming, it doesn't matter. It was like we had to make the decision, at the end when it was edited. And for example, there were family members that I removed because, it's somebody's relative could be drafted, if it's a man. People have, and so the parents, it makes me particularly kind of, the mothers that agreed to be in the film, they agreed after, and they were like, I want to stand by my daughter. And for each person, that calculation is different, the risk. And also it wasn't only, people. I actually retroactively got permission from every single person who appears in the frame, even in the background at Rain, like, a makeup person walking through the frame, because I realized by the time, the film is coming out, it's criminal to work for Rain. This person might, it doesn't matter if they were cool with it at the time.
And I'm going to open it to the audience next. But when you first shared the film with me, it was just 2 years ago, and I asked you, say, what is the structure? Is this a series? Is this a feature? And you said, well, I don't know yet, but you kept it as you first saw it, and what make I think part of the fascination is the combination of intimacy and epic, and the fact that you defended your subjects by allowing their life to be seen as opposed to just the oppression. So you didn't reduce them to someone that has been persecuted by a regime, but you allowed their life to be seen, and so it's a way of defending them. Can you talk a little bit about the structure? Because as an independent filmmaker with no producer, no budget, no no distributor, showing up with a 5-hour film in episode, it's a bigger challenge than if you just nicely packed it in 2 hours and a half.
Yeah, I mean, I've made fiction and documentaries, and I'm not terribly interested in information, which I think you can get from the newspaper. I'm interested in people and what it feels like to live through something, which is something that I can offer. I felt that I was incredibly lucky to film history unfolding live through these incredible people that I fell in love with and that I loved filming, and hopefully that you get to know. And so I just wanted to kind of have the actual material tell me what it needs to be, and I felt the strengths of this was that you get to, this is a moment where it's really the last days when it's possible to work as the opposition in Russia, walking the streets within openly. I mean, there are still people working, obviously, but it's incredibly risky now, many people working anonymously. But it's a shift when it's still possible to have an open opposition in a country, and then suddenly it becomes impossible and you move into full fascism. And I was capturing it. I mean, I just felt incredibly lucky. And I thought, wow, we get to live through this. And so I just was like, okay, this may be the stupidest commercial decision of my life, but I'm just going to make the film that I think the footage deserves.
I can just add that I think at first when Giulia had a premiere, me and Anya, we were like, well, will people in the US really be interested in it because it's so long? And it was before the last election. So like, does it validate them? Can they feel what it means for us? And then I think that because it's so long, it created this sense of, okay, these people are just like me or my children or my neighbors or my friends or people I know. They watch the same movies, they watch the same TV shows, they cook, they bake, they care their children. And I think this is the most important part, that this is not just a movie about, like, as Giulia said, information that you can find somewhere.
Raise your hand if you have any question. There's just one right there.
I'm curious. Thanks. So I'm curious how your perception of the film has changed in the past year with what's going on in America. Because I'm watching it going, like you're showing us exactly what happened 4 years ago, and I feel like we're experiencing it now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a moment Anya and I were remembering when we were fairly early on in the shooting, in which Anya was like, why would anybody, be interested in this? It's like these people in this faraway place. I mean, they're cute, they're nice, but, not so relevant. And then it just kept catching. I mean, I wish it stayed completely irrelevant, but obviously it's what I hear from viewers, how much it resonates. And, I mean, just this week, I hate to say this, but like I was comforting myself, kind of going like, well, chapters 1, 2, 3, where it's kind of the building autocracy and authoritarianism, that's relevant. But, 4, 5, not so much. And then I'm like hearing Republicans talking about, there was actually a New Yorker cartoon this week that cracked me up that it was a cover of, talking about the language. It was a cover of Tolstoy, and it said special combat operations and peace. And it was not referring to the special military operations, but it was talking about how Republicans are suddenly not saying the word war. And I'm like, I don't like that it keeps getting more relevant.
Right there.
I don't want to steal your thunder too much on the next film, but can you tell us of the people that we saw, especially the folks at Rain, how many of them are still left in Russia? How many have come out? And have you been able to speak with them at all?
Oh, nobody. Every single person I was filming, not counting their parents, left. Everyone left. It was literally like you see this meeting, and as you saw with Ksenia, it was like, are we at this moment of, are we going to work today, or are we going to the airport? And it's not possible to work for Rain. Rain, I mean, in Russia, Rain is now based in Exile in Amsterdam. They moved countries several times, and that's in part 2. Everyone continues working, all of the characters. And again, I'm editing now part 2, Exile, which picks up literally 2 days after this. I stayed one day to upload my footage so it wouldn't get taken away at the border. And then I met Ksenia in Istanbul as they were moving hostels and not knowing where to go next. And as everyone keeps getting back up on their feet and tries to figure out how to work as journalists when all their media have been shut down up till the current moment. But Rain is working in Amsterdam. They're now an undesirable organization. What that means is just giving them an interview in Russia is a crime. Reposting a story by them is a crime. They find ways. It's particularly a challenge, with TV news, like that's visual, like how it's one thing to like talk to a source, but when you have to create visual content, they find all these interesting ways to kind of still manage to do a TV channel for Russian news about, Russia and, whether it's hiring anonymous wedding videographers or other stuff, but they have to work with people anonymously who are in Russia.
Is there a way from inside Russia to see what they do? What are the channels that allow the videos that Rain does now to be seen by some Russians at least?
Well, because the YouTube was basically shut down and all of the social media, like it's not legal to post on Instagram, to use like all of the other social media. So people find some ways, like some people use VPN, but you understand, like if there's younger people, they know how to use it, how install it. If like in case of our grandparents, great-grandparents, just people in regions who are far from Moscow, they don't know how to use it, so they basically have no access to this information, which is really sad.
But they do find ways, and it's a kind of whack-a-mole, because like for a long time it was on YouTube, but then Russia started slowing down YouTube, and it's like Rain has an app. My mother's 87-year-old friend said she saw me on there the other day, so people do find it, but people watch it, on Telegram, which is a messaging app that's very popular in Russia and much of the world, on their app, but it's a constantly shifting kind of.
Like every day you have to be faster than the Russian government to create these ways to provide this information to people. Like, okay, if tomorrow they ban Telegram, what's next? Where can we find our audience? But yeah.
What about shortwave radio? Are you doing radio at all?
I mean, all of the like official radio stations, it was only one independent radio station and it was shut down also. So it basically makes no sense when you have Telegram or something. Yeah.
That's the generation of like my parents and the Soviet Union, the shortwave radio. Yeah, I don't think most people have shortwave, but people find there are ways around on internet, and if it just takes a little effort, it's not in your face, but people do. And still, the majority of Rain's audience is in Russia, and they see that as their purpose. You know, for most of these media, they try to reach people. The goal is to reach people inside of Russia from exile to give an alternative to propaganda. It's imperfect, of course, because you're reporting on a place that you're physically unable to go. But I think, you know, one thing, it's a lot of what comes up in part 2 that people talk about, you know, part of it is hoping to convert someone who may not agree with you, but also it's important, you know, like I had a funder here who asked me, like, in the American context, she said, well, how are you going to reach across the aisle and, you know, convert, you know, so it's not preaching to the choir. I'm like, the choir needs preaching right now, you know, and that is very true, I think, for people who are in Russia. If you're living somewhere and you oppose this war, you can't talk about that with your neighbors. You know, if your kid mentions, you know, sunshine and peace is good in school, you might lose your parental rights. But it's very important that you kind of have, you know, maybe you have nobody to talk to even, but you can turn on like Rain and you see people that don't have, you know, horns and tails and they look nice and they're talking about war crimes and things, you know, the world makes sense. And that.
There's one. What, there was one there.
I was just curious, what was the atmosphere in Moscow like that first week or so? Was it palpable fear? Were a lot of protesters truly out, or just a minute?
First week of the war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to start? Well, it was terrible. And I mean, I think now we kind of, I don't want to say used to this feeling, but still used to this feeling that everyone is imprisoned. And at that time, it was like, you saw, like my cameraman, I was like, have I go to the police station to help Edik, my colleague, or should I go to this police station to help my cameraman? What lawyer should I call? Because, like, for example, our lawyer was also imprisoned. And it's like, should I call to the human rights defenders? But then you're like, okay, they're also so busy because all of the protests and they try to help everyone. It was terrible. It was really dark. At the same time, what I think we discussed a lot with Giulia, in the modern world, it feels crazy that at the same time you can buy, you know, your fancy matcha latte, and like Pilates studios are still working. So it feels really crazy. But also, I think dark. I think everyone felt it. I don't believe that there were people who did not feel it.
They just pretended not to or found ways to kind of hide the pain. I mean, you talk about it like when you went into a pharmacy, and I had the same thing. I went to buy a hard drive and I had to like walk through a department store past like, you know, the makeup counters. Like it's kind of like Macy's makeup counter, you know, like the whole floor of makeup counters. And it looked like a normal, and I'm like, this is the first few days of the war, and it's a very weird disconnect. But at the same time, every time like I left my hotel, there was a wall of these kind of riot police, which, you know, we all know what they look like now from like Minneapolis, but you know, standing just there outside and basically making sure protests wouldn't happen after the first couple of days.
This one here.
First of all, amazing movie. I love the fact that you're able to just go to any pharmacy and buy anxiety medicine. That was very good. I feel like we should have that here in the United States. So this was an important film, way more affecting than I think I expected. And it's an important film about, and I have a few questions. So an important film about all these courageous women. And I wondered whether or not there were any men that were actually as brave. And
we ate all of them.
So the one question I have is, when you went to edit it, I would love to hear what you thought about how you wanted to present this, because I think your question about it being either serialized or the way it came across, I think, is a very important decision that you made. And I also wanted to ask you a question about what you're doing now, what's going on with your partner, and I know it's probably covered in the Exile, but please fill us in.
Okay, couple of spoilers. So I'm a proud New Yorker now. I live in New York. This is, but I love Hamptons and Montauk and Long Island, whatever. I lived in 6 countries in exile because with Stevie Rain we went to Istanbul because it was the only one place you could buy tickets at that time. Then we went to Georgia because one Georgian TV channel invited us and gave their studio for free. But then, in Georgia, there is pro-Russian government right now. It became dangerous too, and they also have their protests. So I was hunted by another media that, I did more than 100 interviews with victims of this war, with survivors from Ukraine and Russian political prisoners, families, and Ukrainian POVs. I ran my NGO helping families of political prisoners. Then I went to Prague, then to Berlin, and then I ended up in New York. And I would like to stay in New York. But back to another question. I don't know how it will look like tomorrow here. But I think as Russian independent journalists, we sometimes feel useless and like that we fail because, Alexei Navalny was killed. A lot of people were like poisoned, imprisoned. And like, how did we not, journalists don't have to do something, but how did we not find this connection with people who at the end of the day support this war? But at least I feel like we can talk to other audiences like here or some other countries, and maybe people will see this signs a little bit earlier. Sorry guys, here it's probably too late already, but at least maybe it will validate you. And about my partner, he was like Giulia captured it in part 2, he was sentenced to 22 years of prison of strict regime. He's in Siberia. We connect via letters. We only have like paper letters, and I can send letters via email, and they will scan me his letters. We never had even a phone call. And that's it. But I think we just try to be focused on what we can do, and which is our work, and not to think about tomorrow a lot.
Did I?
Yeah.
There was a quick question. I'll finish up very quickly. That just like there were men that I was filming. They weren't that interesting, so I stopped filming them. It's really that simple. They just were not as open and interesting. I like to film people that I just love as a director. And as to the structure, I don't think and you brought this up. I don't make this distinction between series and films. Like when, all of Dostoevsky, Joyce's Ulysses, and most of Dickens were first released in magazines in serialized form. We don't think of them as not novels. I think we watch films, stopping and starting them and going to get a snack. We sometimes, binge watch like a, 10-hour series. So I don't make that distinction. It's only about like channels of distribution.
And you have a distributor now.
Yes, it's going to be on Mubi April 3rd.
Great. Yeah, so tell your
Mubi.
friends. Because,
MUBI, Mubi.
And
streaming. So tell your friends. They will be able to stream it on Mubi April 3rd.
Congratulations, that's huge. So I think it's so interesting because obviously RAIN started to help inform the Russian community. And how much of that now is getting out to Ukrainians? But, I know in a way, I think the US, we all find it really interesting. I think we have a challenging government in that regard right now, but Europe needs to see this and they need to get behind it. They are like the front line. And I'm wondering how not just this film, but RAIN stories are getting out and how they're being used and what efforts are being put in place for that.
Well, first of all, I think that RAIN is pretty popular in Europe. They tried to do something in English. They translate something. People know about them. Russian-speaking people in Europe obviously know about them. People in Europe know about this movie, and there is a movie about TV Rain, an old one from one of the co-creators of TV Rain. But I think, and I mean, Europe is closer to Russia, so I guess they kind of know, at least some of their countries, especially who have borders with Russia. But the thing, I believe, is that just Putin gave a signal to other authoritarian leaders, right-wing leaders, that you can do this and nothing bad will happen to you. I mean, he has some struggles and like sanctions, but like basically you will be okay, and a lot of people will support you. And I think this is the worst, that there are some countries in Europe too, and other countries that where some people just believed in themselves because they were like, oh, okay, Putin started it and he's living his best life, so I can start it too. And I think this is the scariest part. I think a lot of people know about it. They just, if they don't support it, then they just don't know what to do with it, or they support it, or even more important, or they make money on it, on this wars and this conflict.
Esa questione. And Mubi's also producing is also supporting
They're just picking up for streaming part two.
Anche part also part two. I mean, as you mentioned before, I mean, the Putin's government has reached out outside of the borders to punish or to try to discourage its enemies. Has Rain been actively fought from in a way that it's
I mean, it's one of the things, and again, this bit of spoiler alert for part two, but because the part two really covers this subject of exile. And this is, where you see, so many people have gone into exile, whether it's, with Germany in World War II and people leaving, or Chileans at a time, or Iranians after the revolution, Russians after the revolution. And so part two, which I'm finishing editing now, captures this like live from the first days of like you're in a hostel, you don't know what the rest of your life looks like, up until when it becomes indefinite, with how do you, I think one of the things I'm fascinated by is like all of these people, they all work primarily to bring news to Russians and to this country to try to work for a better future in a country to which they may not return to for decades. And that's fascinating to me. But also, for most people, I think there was this initial exhale when they got to Europe of like, okay, we're safe here. But of course, many of the journalists have faced threats, and they're subtle threats. They're destabilizing threats. They're not necessarily, I mean, in one case, one of the characters was poisoned, not very successfully, thankfully, but it's things that get to you. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, there was this really interesting Joshua Yaffa piece in the New Yorker recently about like how Russia uses destabilization campaigns abroad, and kind of rather than like these spies that we think of like from old James Bond films where they're super professionals and they're super well trained, but they use like single use agents to just do something weird like set a fire in IKEA, just little things where you never feel quite stable. And that seems to be like a part of how it operates now. So nobody feels entirely safe. Nobody feels comfortable. People receive threats, like very uncomfortable threats. Anya the other day got terrible threats. But you don't know, like, is this something that is going to be acted on? But you're never quite comfortable. You're never quite feeling like, let's say you work in an NGO, you never know, like, is this new person that signed up to work with you, is this new volunteer, can they be trusted? Can they not? And it's a sense, it's just this constant, like, or like Rain had somebody come in, I think, trying to interview them, that they thought was, they interviewed Edik, I know, that they thought it was, from a friendly perspective. And then they realized this was a total like propaganda setup so that they could smear them everywhere. And a lot of people got caught in that. So it's this constant sense of just, you're not safe anywhere.
It was a great article, actually, the one on the because it's very low. It's low cost, is highly organized, and is connected to criminal networks. Like it's not just political. It's criminal.
And that's something that comes up in part two.
Rings,
That they generally work through criminal networks. They're not like these kind of super highly trained spies of your imagination. Yeah.
Then we'll let you. We're going to finish, but there's one thing I mentioned before that Mubi supported the film. When you were finished with the film won a New York Film Critics Award. It was nominated for Independent Spirit. It was to the Gotham. I mean, and you did it by yourself. And you started with a run at Film Forum, right? And it kind of took off. And what do you think? And you said before, I think, is the emotional connection that the audience have established with the film. But I mean, it must have been really hard because it was just you and this movie and Film Forum giving you the screen and then it just picked up awards, all this. Yeah. It's
I just think, I was a very stubborn person and I decided that, as it kind of goes back to a question that you asked me earlier, there was times that, early on when I started editing, I had, investors that were offering like to fully fund the film, but then it would have been a normal hour and a half film. And this was before I spent time like editing the footage. And there were times, and I said, I owe it to what I shot I'm only going to make this film once. I have this I need to make it in the way that it needs to be. And maybe that means it will not be, I've been very lucky. I've had it's been really lovely. Some things that have happened, like Frederick Wiseman before a few months, before his death, gave me, watched it. And I was doing an interview and someone put me on and they're like, I've got Fred right here. And he was very complimentary and or hearing from Ezra Edelman who did the OJ series. And I'm like, this might not be seen by a million gazillion people, but I feel like I'm only going to make this film once and I have to honor it and make it the way, if maybe it's less, but I assume that what people, you guys are in a better position to tell me why what connects you to the film than I am. Yeah. Why you're still sitting. Exactly, Giulia. Why are you still sitting here? I can only assume it's because they're so likable. So,
Suzanne.
This was a gut punch. The first, number of hours yesterday were a setup, but today this was the punch of what happens. It was the little pricks that were going on. That was like the slow drip. And then you realize the impact of all of those drips and the destabilization. And then it's war. And this was very emotional today because it really was the payback for watching the slow drip yesterday.
I wish it was the payback for Putin. It would be nice. We're waiting for the payback. We're waiting. Part 3 is when we hope for the payback. Right now, part 2 is going to be Exile. We fantasize. We've already made a deal that should Putin, Russia, should we ever be able, because right now there's another 6 hours coming or so, but with Anya and Ksenia and others and I have decided that, maybe we'll be I'll be 80 years old, then we might, payback comes then.
I should say it was the punch where
it was.
Okay, we have the very last because
thank you so much. That means a lot to me. That means a lot.
How soon will we see part 3? And
part 2.
You tell me, how soon will Putin die? Part 3.
how soon? And also, will it be here in Sag Harbor? And also, will you re-show part 1 and 2?
All together, so we can have a real,
so we can bring
12
in our
hour
friends, because more people should see this.
Yeah, well, we can talk about other screenings, but and this was, we have 2 for the weekend. We can bring the film back. It's also going to be on Mubi, so there will be, there is other access. But yeah, the next one, yes, we're also going to do it.
I hope so. I feel like these are questions for Giulia largely.
I know.
But I think we were talking about this. even though it'll be on movie streaming, like one of the things that I've always hoped for would be to make films that people have something to say to each other about, like not just people you know. So I would encourage you to talk to each other, maybe talk to like someone next to you who you don't know, because the film is so much about community, and I think community is the only way to get, I don't know if we'll get through anything, but at least it's a way of coping. So I hope you will continue to talk to others. And like I said, don't just talk to the person next to you, you know, maybe talk to the person you don't know.
I got my driving license. I will drive Giulia to you again.
Okay.
for part two.
Yeah, the condition, she said, we're only coming if Ksenia can drive, because she just got a driver license. She's incredibly proud and she needs to practice. So, well, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you so much for staying. And yeah, spread the word.
Thank you.